I'm your host, Cinder Shadow. This is Cinder Shadow Gaming, and welcome to my discussion on the upcoming bans for Magic the Gathering. I have a listing of the most used cards coming to the next Mythic Championship. This is the top 20 listed cards of all the deck lists that have been submitted. The deck lists were found on the MTG News article website, and someone had compiled this list. And you can see things like a forest and islands and, lands. Lands, we're going to push those aside right now because they're not really that important. Although I must say, the new Fabled Passage being 131 copies in the almost 70 decks that were submitted, that's quite a bit of an increase, and you'll see that card probably go up in value. If you've got them, hold on to them. But other things that we get out of this context, just by looking at the numbers, is possibly what the emergency bans will come down the pipe. We know that the banning list was moved up for R&D, and it could have been easily based off of something like this, why they've moved it up and why things have drastically changed in the meta. So first off, you have Once Upon a Time in 171 copies. That's a lot of that card. Honestly, to me, it's not run 4 of. To me, I would say run a 2 of this card in any of these decks, because once you get past the free cast version of it, it's whatever. It's not going to be that great. The 4 of just gives you the consistency. But a good alternative and a much cheaper alternative is Bonds of Flourishing. That is a same casting cost. It's a sorcery speed, but if you're playing Teferi anyway with the Bant archetype that we've seen, which is blue, green, white, you'll be able to cast it on their turn anyway, so it's not a big deal. Bonds of Flourishing only goes down 3 cards, where Once Upon a Time goes down 5. But Once Upon a Time only looks at a creature or land where Bonds of Flourishing is any permanent. And it also gives you 3 life. And that 3 life, you're kind of trading off the sorcery and instant speed. Once Upon a Time is a really good card because if you have it in your opening hand, you can cast it for free for the first thing. But that's why it's instant, is just for that extra cast. Other than that, it's not that crazy. Yeah, it lets you dig down a little bit. We've seen cards like this in the past, like Ancient Stirrings, that lets you look for a colorless card, which includes land in that sense. And these are just kind of other takes on that style of card. The second one here that we're seeing the most play is the Hydroid Kerasis. We know this card has been a powerhouse since it made its way into Standard. Is the card inherently broken? Not really. You do get to gain life and draw cards, but that on this card isn't really that crazy because it's you gain half X life and draw half X cards. So if you put in 4 for your X, you're only drawing 2 cards, 2 life. So because it's half of the casting cost, it's not that broken of a card. It's easily dealt with, and there's lots of things that take care of this. So this being one of the higher mythics in the set that it came out in and being very widely used, is this breaking the format? Not really. I wouldn't say so. Growth Spiral is another one that's on here. Draw a card, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. It's an instant, it's 1 blue, 1 green. Now this is the first mana ramp that blue has ever seen, and this card, when it was done, everyone was like, well, this is a pretty good card, and this is going to ramp things really crazily. And now, when it comes to ramp, it is abundantly clear that mana ramp right now is inherently a problem in the current meta and the style of how things go. So, Growth Spiral, does it get a ban? Probably not, because myself, Growth Spiral, I would rather, if I see this card from a scry effect on the top of my deck, I almost always will put it to the bottom of the deck, because I would rather draw the next card than cast the spell to draw the next card. So that's the trade-off here. It's good in your opening hand. Other than that, once again, it's not really that good of a card. It's decent, don't get me wrong, but it just is being used for a mana ramp aspect, and it's not that good at face value. Breeding Pool, of course, you've got your Forest Island Shockland. The whole thing right now is all about Simic, which is green-blue, or Bant, which is green-blue-white. Fable Passage, we went over that. Veil of Summer. There's 120 copies of Veil of Summer. I went through every single deck list, and every single copy of Veil of Summer is in a sideboard. Last I checked, this uncommon is over $6. That is absolutely absurd for an uncommon. For something that only works, 2/5 of the time. So, other than that, it's a card that is dead in your hand. Unless your opponent is playing blue and black, or black, it's dead. This card is absolutely useless. And having a card that is only good 2/5 of the time instead of 5 out of 5 times is not that great. The fact that it's $6+ right now, expect this card to plummet in price when Standard rotates. Until then, it might be something that's a bit of a powerhouse, but once again, it's a sideboard only card. If you don't end up playing blue or black, it's something that never comes into your deck, and it just takes a spot in your sideboard. I'm surprised on this list we don't see Fae of Wishes, which lets you bring any card from your sideboard, any non-creature card from your sideboard, to your hand. And that's where this would become a lot more handy, is having something like this in your sideboard where you are able to get it out of your sideboard in the main game. So because we have Fae of Wishes right now in Standard, and we lost Mastermind's Acquisition, that's kind of where the trade-off was. Once again, I'm surprised we're not seeing more of that, just for the added value of those 15 extra cards in your sideboard. Islands. Now we have Field of the Dead. This is inherently a broken card. This is the one card everybody is expecting the ban when that hammer comes down. It's going to be worth getting out of Standard, because there's very limited ways you can deal with this card. I even got a comment saying that someone dropped like $200 to build a deck revolving around this card, and I kind of sat there and went, well, the card's still going to be around for Modern. It's going to become a powerhouse in Modern eventually, maybe not right now, but it will migrate to there. Anything that's inherently broken in Standard eventually finds its way into Modern. Look at Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. That's where he's migrated to now that he's rotated out of Standard. He is solely being used next to Jace in a Bant build. So you're going to see a lot more of Teferi in Modern when it does come down to it right now. And Field of the Dead is one of those cards that's going to end up there eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Soterius Root. Now, this is to empower gate decks. This one is kind of inherently broken, sort of. It's been a bane since the gates really came back into the fold. It lets you find 2 cards, either basic lands or gate cards, and put them into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. 2 of them. So, because they come in tapped, it's not that big of a deal that you're fetching for 2 more lands. You can go get 2 gates, the gates already come in tapped, so this card kind of inherently breaks that negative of lands coming into the battlefield tapped, because they're coming in tapped, but then you're ramping for the next turn anyway, and that's where these sort of ramp cards, they almost need to be tapped an additional turn for these not to be so ramp worthy, but I get it at the same time. It is 4 to cast. It almost should be 5, but we'll see where things go down. And the other card that's on this list, 114 copies in the Mythic Championship deck list, is Golos Tireless Pilgrim. And in most cases, they're running 4 ofs in the decks that this comes into. It's a 5 casted artifact creature scout. He's a 3/5, and what makes him very broken is the fact that he can search up any land and put it into the battlefield tapped. Once again, that's Field of the Dead that a lot of people are going for. This lets you get multiple copies of Field of the Dead on the board, and that's where these two cards in conjunction with each other make things very broken. If you are running Field of the Dead, you are running Golos, and it's plain and simple, they just go well together. He also has the additional ability for 7 mana, being 1 of each and 2 generic, and you look at the top, you exile the top 3 cards, then you may play those cards without paying their mana cost. So I do kinda like how the 7 casted is, but I don't like that it does 3 cards that you can cast. What it should have been was exile the top 3 cards, choose 1, you may cast it this turn without paying its mana cost, or you may play it this turn. That would have been a little bit more fair instead of it being 3 cards, because if you do have a way of stacking your deck with various scry abilities or other cards that may put stuff on the top of your library, then this can become very inherently broken, being able to recast what you want when you want. Otherwise, he's not that bad. For 7 mana to free cast something, you're putting the mana into it to get that card off, those cards off the top, to be able to free cast, so it's not inherently broken in that sense. Because otherwise you'd just be paying the mana cost of the card that's on there. It just lets you dig a little bit into your library. So I don't really have that much of a problem with it, but I do have more of the problem with the search your library for a land card. Now, originally, why they had that was to help get your mana fixing for the extra ability on here, but people have completely broken this card to Field of the Dead. Now, between these 2 cards, what happens if they only ban one and not the other? Say they leave Field of the Dead in and they ban Golos. What then happens? Well, there is a catch, another way to bring Field of the Dead inherently breaking the format, and that simply is by running Nissa and Nissa's Triumph. Nissa's 5 mana to cast, Nissa's Triumph is 2 mana to cast. And if you control Nissa on the board, Nissa's Triumph lets you search for 3 of any land cards and put them into your hand. Otherwise, it lets you only find 2 forests. 2 basic forests, should I say. So that's the other option there, that you could run this kind of scenario if they don't ban Field and only ban Golos. That's something that will pop up and something to watch out for, because it will continue to become a problem at that sense. Field of the Dead in itself is the card that I have picked straight up that needs to go out of standard right now, because it is shaping the format in such a way that it is inherently broken. You're seeing this in over half of the decks that were submitted to the Mythic Championship. Questing Beast, a 4 mana 4/4 Vigilance, Death Touch, Haste. Can't be blocked by creatures 2 or less. Can't prevent combat damage that creatures deal this turn. And if it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to a planeswalker. For 4 mana, the value on this Mythic is absolutely insane. There's 103 copies of this ending up in the Mythic Champion decks. I have trouble against this card. However, it is removable, and it was someone in the Discord that I run pointed out that there is a nice little card that you could use to supplement it, to go against it, and that would be the Bounty Hunter, or I believe, just looking up the card here, yeah, Bounty Agent, and he's a 1 white 1 generic 2/2. He has Vigilance, and you tap him Sacrifice him, destroy target legendary permanent that is a artifact, creature, or enchantment. And because we have all the whole cycle of artifact permanents that are legendary, like Embercleave, Circle of Loyalty, we have the Cauldron, we have the Great Hinge, that whole thing, that would actually hit that too. So that is something to be on the lookout for, especially in a Hate Bears style deck where you have Hushbringer and Bounty Agent, and something that'll stop enter the battlefield stuff, and it's meant to prevent a lot of these things. So that's where Questing Beast isn't so broken, and once the dust settles here a little bit with this banning, we'll see something come up, and I think Questing Beast will be quelled. I still think it's inherently overpowered for a Mythic, and as a card goes, it's a great card, but once again, it's something that's going to need to be answered. Agent of Treachery. This is a 7-casted 2/3 that steals any target permanent your opponent controls. Now, this card was a mistake in all intents and purposes. 7 mana is probably appropriately casted. However, this thing never goes down for 7 mana. That's the problem with this card. You have Golos that free cast it. You have a ton of reanimating tricks. And then you also have Blood for Bones that will bounce this off the board and bring it right back. You also Teferi's Time Twist or whatever it is. You have the Jessicar's Portal. There's very many ways to bounce this card in and out of the battlefield, and it can make things very difficult. And then there's the countless cloning abilities right now. And if you control 3 or more of your opponent's permanents, you then draw 3 cards per copy of Agent of Treachery on the board. So if you've cloned him a few times, you might be drawing your entire deck and decking yourself. I have done it. You can run this next to Jace, that lets you win the game if you go to draw a card if you don't have anything in your library. Or you just set this up where you're stealing more copies of Field of the Dead. And because of that, Agent of Treachery, is another card that I wouldn't be surprised gets the Banhammer, because he's inherently broken. It should have been gain control of target non-land permanent, or gain control of target planeswalker and or creature, maybe. There's a little bit of limitation that should have happened on this card, I think, and the fact that it's endless, anything on the board, makes it inherently broken, and with especially many different ways that you're bringing it onto the board as a free cast, and that's why this becomes a problem. Now, if they ban Agent of Treachery, it doesn't mean that those free castings aren't still a problem. You have the Bond of Revival, you have Blood for Bones, there's the new one in Eldraine, there's this, that, and everything else. So it's the fact that you're self-milling and bringing these cards from your graveyard, or finding other ways to get them on the board then cheaply without paying their mana costs, is what's become an inherent problem with Magic the Gathering, and it's something that I think Wizards needs to step back and take a look at and stop the free casting stuff, because it's not making for fun times for many people involved. It just makes them inherently broken. Then you have 98 copies of Oko, Thieves of Crowns. He's pretty good. He's not a unanswerable target. However, the fact that he's 4 loyalty on a 3 mana planeswalker and he has 2+ abilities is kind of where the mistake lies. His making a target artifact or creature into a 3/3 elk should have been a negative and not a positive. Because of that inherent flaw in the card, he has become a very big powerhouse and is showing up in anything running blue-green, and not surprising to say the least, because he is a very powerhousey card. 94 copies of Temple Garden, 89 copies of Teferi Time Raveler. This is split between some copies being in sideboards, as Teferi is he's not as much of a powerhouse now that the Teferi Hero of Dominaria has rotated out. You don't see him in every Azorius build or Bant build right now as a main staple for the deck, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's come down a little bit in price because he's not being played as much, but he's still a very powerhousey card. Locking your opponent out from casting instants and stuff like that, only being able to cast on their turn makes things very difficult. You know, the one thing I'm very surprised we don't see is a Rule of Law Teferi counter go deck being more powerhousey than what this is right now. This card does shut down the Simic Flash deck, which I don't even think there was a copy of in the Mythic Championship now, because that Simic Flash deck has just kind of fallen out of favor. I still see it quite a bit in the best of one meta for Arena, as it is still very good in that meta, but when you have a best of 3 scenario with the sideboard, you're easily sideboarding against the Simic Flash deck, and it kind of becomes a archetype that's not really on the top end. Then we have Paradise Druid. Not surprising to see 86 copies of this in those decks. It's pardon me, 1 green, 1 white, or sorry, 1 generic, 2/1 mana dork, which with hexproof. It's a little bit of mana ramp, but not anything inherently broken about it. The Arboreal Gazer, though, is massive mana ramp right now. 83 copies of it. Any deck that's running green right now is running this card just to get the extra lands on the board very early game. And with this card, the Golden Goose and stuff like that, or Guild Goose, whatever it is, I've been seeing like Questing Beast come down on turn 3. I've seen things come down very much on turn 2, turn 3 that shouldn't be there that early in the game. So mana ramp right now is inherently a problem in the game. Especially when you run into the Nissa, who shakes the world. By making forests have an extra green mana, yeah, your mana ramp just doubled in a lot of cases. And that's where Hydroid Colossus is a top-end card with these mana ramp decks. And then Temple of Mystery at 83 cards there, as well as Nissa. So those are the top cards right now for the Mythic Championship. I do want to note the anything that's running Golos with Field of the Dead, because they're running normally a way to do the 5-color ability that Golos has. They are running copies of Kenrith, either in the main deck or in the sideboard, or both. Kenrith is the Buy a Box promo from Throne of Eldraine. He's not inherently broken, but because he slides into those decks so easily and so well, and he's only 5 to cast, 1 white, 4 generic, and he has a mana ability of all mana types. For 1 red, all your creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. For 1 green and a generic, he puts a 1/1 counter on target creature. For 1 white and 2 generic, target player gains 5 life. For 1 blue and 3 generic, target player draws a card. And 1 black and 4 generic, target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. So there is quite a few difficulties with Kenrith, the Return King. As being the buy box promo, we may have another Nexus scenario with them, but it's not inherently causing these turns to go on and on and on like Nexus was. It's the Field of the Dead Golos scenario that really is prolonging a lot of these matches, and that's why the main reason that people are seeing that those two cards are top of the aspect to be on the ban list is mainly because they're making matches or rounds go an extra 30 to 45 minutes longer than they should be when there is no time limit at the higher level events. So because of that, these mirror matches and the way that it recovers from a board wipe state, that's probably why we're going to see both Golos and Field of the Dead. I'm hoping they both go. Like I said, they may only do one of the two and in attempts to try and quell the issue, but I don't think the issue goes away if you only get rid of one. As always, thank you for watching and have yourselves a great day, and please do like and subscribe to the channel and the video. Let me know down below if you like this, and even if you didn't like this, let me know. Maybe give me more thoughts. What cards are you having problems with in the current meta, or what cards do you foresee the future going? I should note that out of the Mythic Championships that there is only one mono red Cavalcade deck, so I had a previous video where I said Spitfire is one of those cards that needs to go, which, because it is a very overpowered card, I still think Spitfire will need to go, because once these bans do happen, if it's not on that list, it's going to become the next top tier deck, and it's just going to be inherently broken when it does come down to that. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Have yourselves a great day.